Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I am so excited. I have an incredible author on with me today, Tim Elmore. He wrote a book that I read and I was like, this is such a good book. I have to reach out to him. So I'm like so grateful that you're on with me, Tim. And the book is called The Eight Paradoxes of Great Leadership. And we're going to be talking about it today. We're going to be talking about like I just love the concept that leadership is paradoxical, right?
Yeah.
That it's not just this follow these set of rules and it's it's one thing. So we're going to be diving into it today. Before we do that, though, I wanted to welcome you to the show, Tim.
Thank you, Becca. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah. So, I would love you to share with everyone what has been your journey that has, kind of have you ended up here today writing about leadership, working with leaders.
Yeah. Well, my career started a long time ago, so here goes. My career began in the classroom. I
Mhm.
began teaching students in 1979, and this would have been high school, and I was starting my grad work, so I was teaching college students as well. So I fell in love with students even when I was a student
Mhm.
way back over 40 years ago. But fast forward 1983, I went on staff with Dr. John Maxwell. So some of your
Oh,
leaders might be familiar with John's name. He's written
yes.
a number of New York Times best-selling books. But
Mhm.
I started with John before he was famous.
Mhm.
And so I was really mentored by him back through the 80s and 90s. And my love of students and my love of leadership under John just got married. You can imagine, I just thought, what would happen if we help these kids not just graduate well, but actually think like life-giving leaders, and
Mhm.
who had a high EQ, not just high IQ when they took a
Mhm.
position after graduation. So fast forward 20 years, I worked with John for 20 years. I started Growing Leaders in 2003. It's a nonprofit organization that what John does for business leaders, I wanted to do for schools and for kids. So it's
Mhm.
really kind of next generation leadership. And
Mhm.
one last thought, Becca, what I decided to do with Growing Leaders is I wanted to offer these timeless leadership and social emotional learning principles,
Mhm.
but something that students would connect with. So
Mhm.
Habitudes is our main resource. It's our main content. Habitudes are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. So it's a way
Mhm.
of learning a timeless principle through an image, a conversation, and an experience. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I love this. I didn't realize you worked closely with John Maxwell. That is like I'm a bit of a fangirl of his too.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is fantastic. So you mentioned EQ and IQ, and before we dive in kind of to the different paradoxes, I want to touch on that because you write in your book a thing I've been saying for years, and I'm going to read directly from the book because I
Okay.
think you just say it so succinctly. You say that you often tell your university students that success in school is 75% IQ and 25% EQ. And in your career, it will be the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true. Isn't it the joke that we always hear? The C students are leading the A students at the company. And certainly
Yeah.
we want to do academics well. You would agree. We
Mhm.
want to be as
Mhm.
smart and insightful as we possibly can. But so much of life is reading cues from others and
Yeah.
being sensitive and empathetic and then wise in our leadership to get the very best out of them. So
Mhm.
I so believe that. I told my own children, they're adults now,
Yeah.
all their life growing up, do well in school. But let me tell you what do well means
Mhm.
in your career. It means you're going to read body language, you're going to pick up interpersonal cues, and you're going to be wise as you relate to them. So, yeah,
Yeah.
the
No, I
thing.
I love that you wrote that. Thank you so much. So, I wanted to talk about, first of all, what was happening that led you to actually write this book, highlighting the paradoxes of leadership, not
Yeah.
just a one, two, three of leadership.
Okay. Well, two big ideas. Number one, I really felt like leadership was often too cut and dry when it was taught.
Mm,
We all
mhm,
know, no, it's not that cut and dry. You don't do step one, step two, step three, and now you're a great leader.
mhm,
Speak well and plan well. Those are great skills for sure.
mhm,
But I felt like I was seeing a world that was being shoved into one or the other corner. It was either or. It was
mhm,
black or white. In fact, think about the world politically right now. It's, oh my gosh, it's blue or red, black or white.
mhm,
You're either for
mhm,
this or against this. You're either my friend or my enemy. And I'm
mhm,
thinking, no, life is not like that.
Mhm.
And there's a little bit of good in all of us, and there's a little bit of bad in all of us. So I know that's cliche, but Becca, I just thought I need to dig deeper, getting past this either or world and see, could there be an answer in the middle? So you saw the paradoxes in the book.
Mhm.
I believe you can be confident and humble. I believe you can be, have vision and blind spots and leverage those blind spots. So I found 8 of these paradoxes, and the more I dug into case studies, the more I thought, oh my gosh,
Mhm.
I think the answer is you balance paradoxes and you read your people before you
Mhm.
lead your
Mhm.
people.
I love that. And also ethics
Mm.
is also paradoxical, which
Yeah.
is mind-blowing in itself, but we're not gonna we're not gonna dive into ethics today, but it's I just love even just this concept, right? Leadership is paradoxical, not black or white,
Yeah.
not a set of
Yeah.
instructions.
You're right. In fact, there's a psychological term that I talk about in the book, a paradox mindset or paradoxical mindset. Research shows that when leaders approach things able to balance paradoxes, they make better decisions and end up with better results. So
Huh?
getting away from the black and white,
Mhm.
which we know isn't right,
Yep.
and and exercising these, we become better leaders, period.
Yep. Research overwhelmingly shows this. And it's like we got to yell this from the rooftops because what's been popularized is not this, right? So
Right.
anyway,
It's
I'm glad we are having this conversation. So before we dive into the paradoxes, I'm a fan of non-example. So I'd love to hear when leaders are unable to live in the paradox, right? To practice these paradoxes, what happens?
Well, first and foremost, if any of us care about results, we're going to diminish the portion of the people that we can actually connect with and get results from. In other words, if let's just take personality. If you say, "Well, this is just my personality. I'm just a 3 on the Enneagram, or I'm just a choleric on the DISC profile. I'm a high D or whatever." Well, if that's all you do and you cannot flex or adapt, you're going to be very limited in the people you can lead and coach and connect with. So that would be
Mhm.
one major reason. If I care about results, I want to be get out of this unadaptable, unflexible, or inflexible mindset. So I feel like my 40 plus years of my career, most of it has been learning to expand beyond my natural or automatic impulses and begin to read, like I said, read the people before I lead them.
Yes, I love that. Read them before you lead them. That is, first of all, a catchy phrase. And it's sticky, right? Read them before you lead. I love that. I might adopt that,
Yeah.
and clearly give you credit. As Tim Elmore says,
Yeah.
read them before you lead them. This is great. You told me before we started recording this analogy of chess and checkers with
Yeah.
leadership, and I feel like right now is the time to share with
Okay.
everyone because it very much relates to what we're talking about right now. So if you could share with everyone how does
Yeah.
chess and checkers relate to leadership?
Okay. Great question. Thanks, Becca. Well, first of all, it may seem like completely weird to talk about
Mhm,
chess and checkers, but we really do believe that when we teach leadership, it becomes stickier when there's a
mhm,
metaphor or an
mhm,
image.
mhm,
And so this is one of our habitudes. Habitudes
mhm,
are images that form leadership habits and attitudes. So think about those two games, chess and checkers. Both are played on the very same game board. So one could be tempted to think, must be the same game. Not true. When I play the game of checkers, all my pieces look alike, they all move alike, so I treat them all alike. When I play the game of chess, the only way I have hope of winning the game is I have to know what each piece can do. That a bishop does this, and a knight does this, and a pawn does this, and a king and a queen. You get the point.
mhm,
Only in knowing the strength of each piece can I win.
mhm,
I have come to believe that mediocre leaders play checkers with their people. They treat them all alike and they get average
mhm.
performance.
Yep.
Great leaders have learned to play chess in the relationships of their life, and they connect with others at the point of their strengths and their personality. And those people flourish under their leadership. And yet, I would guess, I don't know who all your listeners are, but I would guess most of us, if we've been trained in leadership, we've been trained this is the right way to lead. Go.
Mhm.
And you and I
Mhm.
both know that's the worst advice I could give you.
Mhm.
Think about parenting for a minute. If parents have more than one child, they're eating the same green beans under the same roof, and they're so different. People
Yeah.
are different. Like you said
Yeah.
before, they're humans, and
Mhm,
humans are
mhm.
different. So
Yeah.
I think I've got to do the work, and it is more
Mhm,
work to play chess than checkers. I've got to
mhm,
do the work to say who's in front of me. What do they
mhm,
need right now? How can I then meet that need and somehow touch a heart before I ask for a hand? So
mhm.
that's really the point of chess and
I
checkers.
love this. I love this analogy. Chess over checkers. Yes. And what I find is when leaders are doing, playing checkers, right, with their staff in schools, sometimes what happens when they're using the same strategy with everyone and not everyone responds the same, what can happen is blame,
Yeah, you're right.
labeling you're resistant,
Yep.
right? Instead, like they're, because this one strategy didn't work for everyone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what we want is to actually empower our educators to stay in the profession and thrive, right? And
Yes,
and
absolutely.
chess is the way to do it.
No doubt about it. You know, the principle that we're actually talking about, Becca, right now, is something I put in my last book, A New Kind of Diversity. It's on generations. But I use the phrase context explains conduct.
Mm,
So isn't it true if somebody does something that just is unexplainable and you are frustrated like you did, yeah, I can't
mhm.
believe you just did that. What are you thinking? You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
it true? You start hearing the backstory, and even if you
Mm,
don't agree with what they just did, you at least go,
mhm,
"Oh, that explains everything."
mhm,
My daughter, Bethany, is a counselor. She's a therapist. And she told me that one day she came home from work and her colleague had just met with a family and done
mhm,
therapy with a family. And she said, "Oh my gosh, it was such an enlightening hour." She
mhm,
said they brought their 5-year-old little boy in, the parents did, and said, "Something's wrong with our son. He runs around the house screaming every time we plan to go out from the house."
mhm,
And then they said, "We noticed he started locking himself in the bathroom at 5 years old and not wanting to come out." And we said, "What is wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" And they said, then when he did come out, now this is a bit graphic, hang on, he was rubbing his own poop on his
mhm,
arms. And they said, "Oh my gosh, something's wrong with him."
mhm,
Well, they brought their little boy into the counselor. The counselor was 5 minutes with his family and said, "Mom and Dad, would you mind if I had just a few minutes alone with your son? Would you step out for just a minute?" They said, "Sure." Well, the counselor met 5 minutes with this little boy, asked the parents to come back in and said, "There is nothing wrong with your son." They said, she said, this counselor, "I found out when you were away for just a few minutes that when you went out and went to family gatherings, family reunions, he was being sexually assaulted by
mhm,
Uncle Bob, we're going to call him." Well, of course he rubbed poop on his arm. That was the
mhm,
way to keep Uncle
mhm,
Bob away. And
mhm,
I know it's an extreme example, but
mhm,
context explains conduct. You find
mhm,
nothing wrong with the little boy. Something's wrong with the uncle. We need to take care
mhm,
of this. So
mhm,
I think coaches listening, leaders listening, just keep in mind people will do things that aren't explainable and you can get frustrated. I do too.
mhm,
Best things I can do is there's another image, stethoscopes and treatments. I need to put a stethoscope up to them, not literally, but relationally, and say,
mhm,
"Let me hear the heartbeat. Let me find out what's going on." Now my
mhm.
treatment will be what much more insightful because I've got a little backstory on that person. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to dive into the paradoxes. There's
Okay.
8 of them, and you and I chatted. I think there's 4 that could really be poignant for school leaders. And that we're gonna talk about all 8,
Okay.
but I wanted to dive into the 4 that
Yeah.
we were like, yes, these will really resonate. And the first one is great leaders have vision and I may not get the wording exactly right, but understand their blind spots as well. They
Yeah.
balance vision and blind spots. Did I get that?
Yeah, yeah, you did. Yeah, those seem oxymoronic, do they not?
Mm.
How can you have
Yeah.
vision and blind spots and both are useful?
Mhm.
Well, we all know certainly blind spots can ruin us. There's no doubt about it. We have story after story about, ooh, I had a blind spot and I didn't pay attention to it.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I found in this book, Becca, that the best leaders actually leverage both. Now, we
Mhm.
all understand vision. A good leader has to have a vision for the future. If you
Mhm.
don't, you're just managing people. You're just,
Mhm.
treading water.
Mhm.
Nothing wrong with that, but let's admit it. That's just management, not leadership.
Yeah.
But I found the best leaders actually leveraged or used their blind spots to their advantage. So the case study I have there in that chapter is not an educator, but it's a great story. Um, I talk a little bit about Sarah Blakely, who
Mhm.
was the founder of Spanx, and many
Mhm.
women
I
listening
love
might know.
her.
Yes, she's an amazing leader. But she
Yes.
admits in her story, I had some major blind spots in the beginning of my leadership. So the quick story, I'll do this in 1 minute. Sarah graduated from Florida State. She was selling fax machines door to door, not too fun in that Florida heat. So she began to cut her stockings and she essentially invented Spanx just out of her own bedroom. But here's what she did. She thought, I think this could be a product to invite customers to purchase. But she didn't have any idea, how to do this. So she ended up calling a friend of a friend who had a contact at Neiman Marcus department stores. She asked for 10 minutes with this executive. She flew out, met with this executive, and she discovered 5 minutes into her meeting, she was getting nowhere. This executive was probably meeting with a dozen people that day, and she was lost in the numbers.
Mhm.
So Sarah, as a late 20 something, stood up and said, would you follow me? The executive said, I beg your pardon? She said, would you follow me? And Sarah led her into the women's restroom. I'm not kidding. And
Mhm.
she tried on the Spanx right there in front of her. Well, sold. I mean,
Mhm.
this was an incredible thing. I mean, if anybody knows anything about Spanx, they do help the shape of
Mhm.
anybody, men
Mhm.
or women.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, bottom line, the department store executive said, we'll beta test this in a handful of stores. Sarah
Mhm.
was smart enough to go, what stores are those? She called up all of her friends in those cities, said, I'm going to send you some cash, buy out all those things. Well, the rest is history. It took off,
Mhm.
and one thing led to another. And well, today, Sarah is now a billionaire with a B.
Mhm. Mhm.
Here's the reason I put the story in. Sarah was doing a workshop on how she got started with her leadership. And
Mhm.
in a Q&A session, one young person raised their hand and said, I got to know, how did you get the attention of a major department store like Neiman Marcus in those
Mhm.
trade shows where there's thousands of exhibitors? How did you get the attention of Neiman Marcus? And Sarah,
Mhm.
of course, leans forward and smiles and says, trade shows? I didn't know I was supposed to go to a trade show. Very blind spot she had on how to start, how to go to
Mhm.
market with a new product. She had
Mhm.
no idea, and that was her saving grace. So I guess let
Mhm.
me say one more thing, and then you can volley back. I feel like so often the world is changing rapidly, even in the
Mhm.
education system. And
Mhm.
sometimes it behooves us to try something brand new in a new and fresh way
Mm.
and not do protocol, not know
Mm.
how it normally is done.
Mhm.
It might
Mhm.
be the thing that saves the very new idea we have to lay on the table.
Yeah, I love that. And it's ironic to say leverage your blind spots
Yeah,
because
yeah.
inherently we can't see them.
That's right.
And right, so you have in that chapter, you have the four truths about blind spots. And I just want to read them because I found them poignant. I really like them. Number one is our blind spots are often found conspicuously close to our strengths. How
Yes.
interesting is
Yep.
that? Blind spots may be undetected only to surface later in our careers.
Yep.
Our blind spots have little to do with our intelligence. Everyone has blind spots.
Yes. Right.
Everyone. I have them. You have them. It's a
Yep.
human experience to have blind spots. And blind spots can serve to make us fearless, bold risk takers, which can be both good news and bad news for our leadership.
No doubt about it. Yep. You want me to
I
just
love
volley
that.
back a little bit on that?
Hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, the first one I put in number one because I noticed as I got accountability in my life for my own leadership journey, I was
Hmm.
noticing, oh, I do have blind spots after all. And they're
Yes.
they're often very close to my gifts. We are not as we're so intuitive in the area of our gifts. We feel like,
Mhm,
oh, I don't see anything around them. I just naturally
mhm,
do that. It's kind of
mhm,
like the most natural hitter in baseball can't
Mhm.
teach hitting because he does it so naturally, or she does it so
Yes.
naturally. So I think I invite accountability and say, please show me what my blind spots are because I won't see them in the area of my strengths. And then I love, well, I love all four of those too, Beck, I got to admit. But that last one, oh my goodness, um, it does make us bold when we don't see what could go wrong. But
Mhm.
that's why I need people around me. We have a habitude for that, sturdy guardrails. Just like on
Mm.
a road, you need those guardrails where the road curves and there's a cliff
Mhm.
right there. I
Yep.
need guardrails in the form of people that can say,
Mhm.
Becca, Tim, I know you can't see this, but you're about to go off a cliff right there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
people around us that see things differently are our greatest
Mhm.
savior in that moment to help
Mhm.
us not go off the cliff. Yeah.
Yes. I love that, right? Really leaning on our team
Yes.
to
Yeah.
help us see some of our blind spots as well. So important because we
Yeah.
inherently can't see them.
You know when I came up with this, Becca, this blind spot thing?
Yeah.
I was teaching my son to drive many, many years
Mhm.
ago. And I said, now, Jonathan, you've got some blind spots. He
Huh.
was 16. He goes, no, I don't. No, isn't that true? But in a
Yeah.
car, your blind
Mhm.
spots aren't a result of how smart you are. They're
Mm-mm.
about the position you have in the car.
Mhm. Mhm.
Bingo. We all have a
Yep.
certain position that's good news, bad news.
Mhm.
We need
Mhm.
people in other parts of that car to go, hey, there's a car over there, you know.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'll stop there, but
I love that.
yeah, it's just true about life.
Yes, I love this so much. So the next paradox I want to talk with you about is balancing being stubborn versus open-minded. And what I love is you use a word that I'm sure leaders are like, is stubborn ever a good,
Yeah, yeah,
a good quality? And you're like, no, it is, right? So I'd love
yeah.
you to share more about that. What do each look like and how does it benefit us to be both?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that question, Becca. You're so kind. I love this topic. In fact, whenever I do an event and I speak on these eight paradoxes, business, schools, you name it, they always want to talk about this one because they go, wait, stubborn, that's bad, right? In fact, my case study on this one was Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, who passed away, but he was this. And when I talked to executives at Chick-fil-A and I talked to Dan Cathy, his son, Dan even said, could we use a different word besides stubborn? Could we use strong-willed? And I said, Dan, we could use strong-willed, but stubborn is such an emotionally, it's just
Charged.
an emotional word. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dan thought about it and he said, Tim, you're right. He said, my dad was the most stubborn man I've ever met and the most open-minded man I've ever met. Isn't that powerful? But
Mm.
here's the bottom line. I'll do this quickly. He was stubborn in the right handful of areas and he's
Mhm.
open-minded on almost everything else. So
Mhm.
really, this is about leaders choosing where do I need to choose to be stubborn? And it's
Mhm.
not a lot,
Yep.
especially in today's changing world.
Mhm.
But so you really work on your open-mindedness, which we all need to work on, but you
Mhm.
choose those timeless, I think, principles or
Mhm. Mhm.
convictions that you need to hold to.
Mhm.
Isn't that true? There's some
Mhm.
things, Becca, you should not
Mhm.
compromise on. You need to
Right.
say, sorry, this is who I am. I may not
Mhm.
be the right person for you because this is who
Mhm.
I am, but I am
Mhm.
the right person for a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah.
So this was a great chapter for me. I was learning as I wrote. I'm going to say that
Mhm.
again. I was learning as I
Mhm.
wrote, looking at great leaders that chose their stubborn spots and
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
really, really worked even into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. In Truett's
Mhm.
case,
Mhm.
be open-minded. Truett opened up a new restaurant in his 90s. I just
Wow.
breathing when I'm 90, you know? But he was able to because he was so open to say, ooh, I think we should choose this menu item and this decor and this music, even in
Mhm.
his 90s. So I was heartened, not disheartened by this
Mhm.
chapter, by the fact that you can keep growing and
Mhm.
stay open-minded even in your late in life.
I love this. And I feel like this relates to the next paradox I wanted to talk with you about, which is having high standards
Mm,
and having gracious forgiveness.
yeah.
How cool is that? And it feels a little similar in the
Yeah.
realm of like,
Yep.
okay, high standards, right? We are here, but then there's this like flexibility around it.
Yeah.
I think before we dive into it, I just think school leaders, you grapple with this every day. I know you do, where you want to empower your teachers to take risks and also have effective classroom instruction, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's that balance and what do you do and how do you do it? So I'd love you to share more about that.
Okay. This is so great. You and I did touch on this before we went online. I love how you love this principle. I do too. So, listeners, there's a fine line between practicing this paradox and just fudging all the time and saying, "Oh, okay, you're forgiven. You're forgiven. No big deal. No big deal." Great leaders do not say no big deal. But
Right?
there is a way to avoid that dilemma
Mhm,
and still practice this paradox. So here's what I would say. These uncommon leaders are sticklers for excellence. In
mhm,
fact, think for just a minute, listeners, about the great organizations you know, maybe even outside of education, Apple and Google and Zappos and others that just
mhm,
are, they're leading the way in their industry.
mhm,
They are sticklers for excellence. So they do not drop the standard.
mhm,
Yet, when they have a team member, whoever it is, that's pushing to meet that standard and they fail, they don't just let them go. They just spend a lot of money training them
mhm,
so you forgive without dropping the standard. In fact, I think this is true about any industry and any leader. So these leaders keep the standards up, but they somehow say, if I see a team member push themselves, I mean, really push themselves to meet it, but they don't meet it, they say, all right, let's find out what we learned. So earlier in this podcast, I talked about I worked for John Maxwell. I started with John Maxwell right out of college in the early 80s. Well, there was a bunch of times John could have just fired me. In fact, there was one time I went into his office and I told my wife, sweetheart, I may be let go in this meeting. You may not keep me. So just brace yourself when I come home tonight.
mhm,
But I get emotional when I tell this story. I sat down with John, bracing myself, and John said, all right, Tim, let's talk about what we can learn from what just happened because I think we need to do it better next time. And I said, you're okay? You're not going to let me go? He said, why would I let you go? You just learned a bunch. You just learned a
mhm,
truckload of insight.
mhm,
And I thought, oh my gosh, what a great leader who would not. And by the way, you can imagine it was tough to work for him. I
mhm,
tell people
mhm,
you either thrived under John Maxwell or you died under John.
mm.
And thankfully I thrived and he kept me around for 20 years. And then I started growing leaders. And he said he was the first one to
Go.
cheer me on and
Mhm,
make a donation to the nonprofit. But I'm telling you, John had the uncanny ability to keep that standard high. I am way better today because he had high standards in my
mhm,
20s and 30s.
mhm,
So I learned how to maintain this excellence thing and still keep people around that were imperfect and still
mhm,
striving to meet it. So I'm hoping that's even
mm.
a good attempt at summarizing this principle.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to connect. First of all, I got chills when you were telling that story. And I wanted to connect this to growth mindset culture. I know
Yes.
schools
Yeah.
value operating under growth
Yeah.
mindset, having a culture that supports that. And this principle, this paradox,
Yeah.
it speaks to it, right? So when we operate under a growth mindset, we are embracing our mistakes, taking
Yeah.
risks, being messy, and learning from them, right? And the way we learn from our mistakes is we reflect on them. We
Yes,
don't
that's right.
just inherently learn from them. And I love how how John said to you, you just learned a ton, right? So he
Yeah.
wasn't focusing on, well, you made this mistake, like you
Yeah.
go down a notch. It
Yeah.
was like you've actually, and he ushered you through that. It
Yeah.
wasn't
That's
like
true.
good
Yeah.
luck in learning it. We're going to do this together. We're going to learn,
Yeah.
from this mistake together,
That's
right?
right.
And I'm sure you walked away knowing there's still really high standards.
Yeah.
And
They did not change. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, they didn't change. And there's space for me to learn from my mistakes.
Yeah. What John did for me as a mentor was he didn't focus on what we lost in my mistake, but what we gained from
Mhm,
my
mhm,
mistake. And that's huge because we tend to be scarcity rather than abundant
mhm,
mindsets,
mhm. Yep.
fixed mindset versus growth mindset.
Mhm,
And you're right, there is a distinguishing point we need to make. I just finished a great book called The Right Kind of Wrong. And in this book, the author talks about a study that was done of two hospitals. She said, in this study, we assumed that the cultures in these hospitals that had high morale and and positivity would make fewer mistakes.
Mhm.
And she was wrong. She said both of these hospitals made mistakes. But when she dug deeper, here's what she discovered. In the one hospital that pushed for excellence, they made mistakes, but they reported fewer mistakes. In other words, both hospitals made equal amount of mistakes.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
if you've got this high standard, but without gracious forgiveness,
Mhm.
people won't talk about it. Shh,
Mhm.
don't tell anybody.
Mhm.
That's what it was.
Mhm.
And the other one that had high morale, she said they actually reported more mistakes, but it wasn't more. It was just reported more because they knew they had the permission to
Mhm.
tell their supervisor,
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. I just got this thing wrong. Let's
Mhm.
quickly recover.
Mhm.
But there was high morale because we could actually talk about the mistakes. Isn't that brilliant?
Mhm. Yeah,
I'm thinking,
it
boy, I
really
can
is.
learn from that. Because
Yeah, it was, yeah,
people are hiding them. That's what they're doing.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Was that Amy Edmondson? Her
Yes.
book? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have
Yeah,
her book on my nightstand.
it's awesome.
I,
Right.
it's really it's yeah, it's great. All right. So the last paradox I wanted to talk with you about in depth is balancing being personal versus collective. And you said when the pandemic happened, right,
Yeah.
this was the paradox that was so strongly highlighted in schools and just present
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. I
So
had
I
a
I just would love you to speak more about how what that looks like. How do we balance both of those?
Well, during the pandemic, as we partner with schools, I found myself talking to both superintendents and
Mm,
principals that said,
mhm,
I felt like made a year's worth of decisions in 1 month. Isn't that true? We were all
yeah.
mask, no mask, come in, don't come in. I mean, I'm being silly here, but we were all just tired after a
Mhm,
month, after a
mhm,
week of decisions. So this one actually was learned during the pandemic. I noticed that what leaders really needed to display to their people was I have the big picture of what's going on. I've got well, during the pandemic, it was I've listened, Dr. Fauci or whatever. I got the big picture on the COVID-19 thing.
yeah.
But they also had to display to their people, and I understand your personal struggle and story.
Mhm, mhm,
So isn't this brilliant? And I'm not saying because I'm doing it great, but I learned during that period of time, people need me to say, oh, she gets it. He gets it. They
mhm,
have the big
mhm,
picture. They're watching the zones of this and when it's
mhm,
safe to come back in and so forth and
mhm,
so on.
mhm,
But there was always the time I'm spending communicating with you people,
mhm, mhm,
oh, she knows what I'm going through. So
mhm,
one of the stories I tell was I was speaking at an event and the leader, it was actually the president of this organization, made the annual speech. And during that speech, he had PowerPoint slides on the big picture, how they had grown that year. Everybody could see, oh boy, this guy's smart. I'm so glad
mhm,
he's in charge. He
mhm,
gets the collective story of our fiscal year.
mhm,
But then at the end of this portion of the speech, he did something very interesting. He took off his glasses, just like I'm doing right now.
mhm,
He
mhm,
stepped out from behind the podium and said, now, I'd be kidding myself if I thought that I had led the charge on this one. Nancy, over in marketing, you guys crushed it this year. And Bob, over in tech, oh my gosh, we would have never been able to do this without you. And and by the way, he just went through 3 or 4 or 5 people. People start getting tears in their eyes. I mean, I look back at the soundboard. The guy at the soundboard's getting tears in his eyes. He doesn't
yeah.
even work for the company.
Yeah.
He's seeing that this guy is collective
Mhm,
and personal, and
mhm,
he's given all the credit away. And we all
mhm,
know when we've seen leaders do this, this is what wins with people. When he
mhm,
was done with this speech, both the general and the personal, people leapt to their feet, standing ovation.
mhm,
I'm on my feet, and I don't even
mhm.
work for this company because he brilliantly balanced both of these. I
Mhm,
get the big picture and I get the little picture. I
mhm,
get the collective and I get the personal struggle along the way. I know how this must feel to you here. This is what makes people want to follow a leader.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. It's really great, and it truly is a balance for those.
Yeah.
So we've gone through 4 of the 8 paradoxes. I'd love to just mention the other 4 so folks know, and then, if you're
Okay.
interested in learning more, they can grab the book. So, let me just open to them, unless you have them memorized. I do not have them memorized.
Yeah.
Let's see. Which ones have we not gone through? Okay. Let's see.
Paradox one.
Paradox 1 is uncommon leaders balance both confidence and humility.
Yep. Yep.
Really important. Uncommon Paradox 3 is uncommon leaders embrace both visibility and invisibility. That's
Yep.
interesting. Thinking about
Yeah.
visibility. I know
In other words, there's a
school.
time to be seen and a time
Yeah.
to be not seen. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep,
Okay.
yep, exactly, and I think school leaders could identify as that
Yeah.
with that. Okay, good.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, paradox 6 is uncommon leaders are both teachers and learners, and I think that's
I'll buy
quite
that one.
yeah, quite present in schools.
Yep.
And then paradox 8 is uncommon leaders are both timely and timeless. And I think that speaks to the world is changing. We talk about 21st century learning, and we're not overhauling everything in education. There are timeless
Yeah.
things in education that just will never change. It will
Yeah.
always be important. And there are innovative things. The world is changing, and we need to
Yeah.
change with it and prepare
Yeah.
children to be ready for it.
No, you're spot on. You got this so much. You could teach this stuff. It's so true. I did a book some years ago called Marching Off the Map, and my opening story was Alexander the Great. We've all heard of
Mhm,
this great Greek conqueror, but it was timely and timeless. He marched into worlds for which we had no maps for yet, and
mhm,
his
mhm.
soldiers were frustrated as he turned them into map makers. At the same time, when he went into those new territories, they look for water, they look
Mhm,
for food,
mhm.
timeless.
Yep.
So both are needed.
Yes, love that. So this has been such an interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed this with you. And I think we have to wrap up. So I would love you to share, where can people find your work, find your books, find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, they can follow me on social media. It's at Tim Elmore. Growingleaders.com is our
Mhm.
work with schools. And then I do lots of keynotes, and you can simply find me at timelmore.com. Becky, it's been such a joy to talk with you. It's so fun to meet like-minded people that just feel the same way and think the same way. So thanks for letting me crash your party today. It's been fun.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for joining me. This has been a pure pleasure.